Today on the LIVEcast, takes on a tragedy, 9 responses to London Bridge. Hello, welcome everybody to the LIVEcast. My name's Glen Scrivener, and over there with the noisy iPad, it is...
Paul Feesey, offering his apologies immediately.
Ever the professional. We are talking today about 9 responses to the London Bridge terror attack on Friday, and if you're watching on YouTube, there you have the 9 already. So spoiler alert, there it is. That's where we're heading. There have been all sorts of different takes on the terror attacks on Friday, but Paul, when did you first hear about these terror attacks, and can you maybe bring us up to speed on what actually happened on Friday?
Yep. So first I knew about it was in some texts, because I'm part of a house group, Blokes House Group, and I just saw some messages saying, you know, is everybody okay? Because a lot of the guys who go to our church work up in kind of London Bridge and around that area, and people were saying, you know, did you get back okay? And actually everybody, fortunately, had, you know, by chance come home early, and, you know, so they managed to get out of London as well, not just get stuck there. So, yeah, I mean, it seems to have been that there was this man, Usman Khan, who has attacked and stabbed a number of people in a fishmonger's hall, is that right? Mm-hmm. Before that kind of spilled out into the streets, where he was kind of challenged by some members of the public who stopped him, but then it was revealed that, or he revealed he had some kind of vest on that looked like a suicide vest, at which point the armed police had arrived by that stage, and he was shot immediately on that. So. Yeah,
brilliant. And we've got some great footage from the chief executive of the Fishmonger Livery Company, and he kind of brings us up to speed on what happened right before all those famous videos that you might have seen of Usman Khan being taken on by a narwhal tusk and a fire extinguisher. But let's hear it from him, what actually took place on that Friday afternoon.
He's the guy who cleans the glasses down in the basement, and that's exactly what he was doing when he hears this scream. The scream is so loud that as a first aider he makes a choice. He goes towards the trouble. He gets there on the first floor of the building just behind me, and it's pretty clear that there's a bad guy. He's got 2 knives in his hand, there's blood, there's screaming, there's chaos. Lucas pulls off the wall this long stick. He charges towards the bad guy, and he impacts him on the chest. And there's clearly something here that is protective, and it doesn't make any sort of impact. But he's buying time. He allows others to escape, to move to adjacent rooms. And at that point, he's got about a 1-minute one-on-one straight combat. This guy we now know by the name of Khan. He works his way up Lucas's poles, slashing with this knife, and he takes 5 wounds to his left side, and he's going to lose some strength on that side. But he's done what he needed to do in the first instance. So 2 other guys who are part of the charity, one's got a fire extinguisher now, and one's got this narwhal tusk ripped off the wall. They come and join the fight, and it's pretty gruesome. I think the terrorist decided he was outnumbered. He runs for it. He goes down the main staircase. And the next bit of hell is at reception. He can't get out the front door, so he turns to reception when our guy called Gareth, who's the doorman, is pushing the door shut as good as he can, so that Dawn, a yard behind, can get on the telephones, hit the alarms, do exactly as her training is told to do. Khan shifts his position to the cloakroom. The girls there, Ala and Sandra, they have a hell of a time. And then eventually it all comes to a great sort of showdown in the entrance hall. Lucas is back in this point, leading the charge, and Andy's the last guy I introduced here. He's our maintenance man. I'll tell you what, 2 things: he's a Ministry of Defence ex-policeman, and he's also a pretty cool customer. But when the knife goes to his chest, and kill or open the door is the choice. He pauses for a moment. He's reluctant to spill all this out onto the pavement when members of the public are going to be facing the same problems, but he makes exactly the right choice. The door's opened, out the terrorist falls, and the first one after him is Lucas, shouting at everyone to get out of the way, get back. But I tell you what, members of the public, they just don't do that nowadays. They do what they needed to do. They join in. The man with the fire extinguisher, the man with the narwhal tusk, they're all in there. Lucas is losing strength on his left side at this point, but tell you what, his job is done. The police are here, and I think you've seen the rest already on camera.
So we did see the rest on camera. What was it that you first saw on social media as you were following this story?
First thing I saw on social media was the narwhal tusk.
Yes.
That was the kind of the viral thing almost immediately that kind of was out there.
Yes, and for those who don't know what a narwhal tusk is, and none of us did until Friday, what actually is a narwhal?
Yeah, well, it's a type of whale, I believe.
Yes.
So, yeah, and it was one of those bizarre things. You kind of wonder, where did this, who has a narwhal tusk just lying around ready to go?
The Fishmonger's Livery Company.
Apparently, yes, it was on the wall, and
does.
this guy, I think it was alluded to in the video, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That this guy pulled it off the wall and used it to attack the attacker effectively and defend against him.
Yes. For those who don't know, in London, in the city of London, there are all sorts of livery companies that are sort of like really ancient trade unions, really. And there's the fishmongers and the haberdashers, and there's all sorts of people who have trades, and they would get together. And it was a bit of an economic clique that you had to get membership of. If you were going to be a fishmonger in the city of London, you had to belong to the livery company. So yes, these livery companies have bags of cash these days, and they have very nice premises like this one right on London Bridge, and they have exotic things on their walls like narwhal tusks, but that, I guess, is a weapon when it needs to be. And this is this is the first of the 9 takes that we're going to have a look at in terms of how have people responded to the London Bridge incidents. And it's the social media take, which is the hottest of hot takes. It's instant, it's memeable, it's quirky.
And a lot of people, I think, I saw footage of that people had filmed from the buses that were alongside where this was taking place. And to them, you can tell for the large majority of what they're filming, you can see these, 2 or 3 guys trying to spray this guy with a fire extinguisher, and they've got this narwhal tusk and things. They seem relatively amused by it, because I think that clearly they've not really understood what's gone on down the road, because that's out of sight for them. And for them, it is very much like, oh, here's just some guys in the street having a brawl, and it looks slightly amusing what's going on. And then it's only, when that kind of dies down and the police are there, and this guy gets shot, that suddenly everybody kind of realizes something a lot more serious has gone on.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's a little microcosm of what it's like for everybody. Like on social media, that was my first thing. People making jokes about narwhal tusks, and like, what's a narwhal tusk? And suddenly it's probably the most Googleable thing in that hour on Friday. And it's quirky and it's interesting and
oh, absolutely, it's very kind of. I mean, so the guy who wielded it was a Polish guy, wasn't he?
Right.
But I mean, just the whole situation, you look at this kind of fire extinguishers and narwhal tusks, there's a kind of, quirky Britishness to...
Yes, it's like Basil Fawlty taking it out of his car with the branch.
It is that kind of thing. So.
Yes, yeah. And so you can see where, it's a bit of a chuckle, but just like those people in the bus, they didn't know what was happening. And so many people tweeting and retweeting this, we haven't really been cognizant of the fact that there are 2 people who've just died.
Yeah.
And, 3 others who've been stabbed. And so, the social media take, though it is the fastest and the hottest of hot takes, might let us down in terms of depth and wisdom and perspective and all those sorts of things. And for me, it was kind of a wake up call that the world you live in social media is full of hashtags and funny, quirky jokes. But it's probably no way to digest what's really going on in the world. I mean, so often the way I receive the news is I work backwards from some joke that somebody's made on Twitter.
Right, yeah.
And now I know what the headline is because there's a punchline that I don't quite get. And that's the way I figure out the news, isn't it? That might not be the best way of figuring out what's going on in the world. So that was the sort of the social media take. And following hot on the heels of that, because social media collapses all differences of context, and collapses all horizons. And it feels like, because the news is coming to you in your own handheld device, whatever's going on, even if it's on the other side of the world, it feels like it's just happened next door. And so lots of people want to have views on, let's say, guns.
Yeah.
And so that led to a number of different takes online. We had one tweet from somebody who said, America, only guns can keep us safe. Great Britain, pass me the narwhal tusk and a fire extinguisher. And again, playing into that whole, that's funny and it works.
Yeah,
and
it's
makes
the
a point.
meme culture of stuff, but also making a bit of a point there about that issue.
Yeah. And so whenever these mass killings happen, there comes a debate about what kind of weaponry is open for civilians to have and what kind of weaponry isn't. And I guess in this case, we were limited to some. Were they like kitchen knives? They weren't the largest knives, were they?
Yeah, like I'm not sure where. Some people were unclear where he'd got the knives from, whether he'd actually picked them up from somewhere.
Yeah,
he hadn't bought them
from
with
the
him,
kitchen.
but he got them in the kitchen or something. So I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure they were only standard kind of kitchen-style knives.
Yes. So we're not talking about AR-15s, and we're not talking about a hail of bullets.
No, absolutely not. People were able to get close to this guy,
right?
With his knife, with a fire extinguisher and a narwhal tusk.
Yes.
And their bare hands, some of them, so.
Yeah. The only one with guns was the police who.
Yeah, and obviously a very specific armed response unit, SO19 is it, I think they're called. They're the kind of armed unit who were there with it, from what I understand, within 5 minutes.
Right. I think even less. Yeah. So, but you get tweets along the lines of, we need greater access to guns because guns are the great equalizer. If you've got a bad guy with a gun, what you need is other good guys.
Good guys with the guns.
With the guns. And so this guy tweeted this, David Wall. He said on Twitter, takeaway from London Bridge incident, if law-abiding Londoners could carry firearms legally, it probably wouldn't have happened. Amazing how bold the terrorists are when they know their victims will be unarmed. It wasn't a popular tweet on this side of the pond.
No, I mean, I don't know who that guy is. I mean, I think he looked like he's got a blue tick, so maybe he's someone. But the way I saw that was just so many people's responses back against it, just saying, like, what are you talking about? This is crazy. Yeah. Like, had he had... if there was access to weaponry, this would have been a far worse tragedy than it even is. Maybe, So likely that many more people would have been victims of that.
Yeah, I just don't think multiplying the lethal force that's available to people.
No, and it doesn't seem to be what the statistics show. Because, I mean, I think we've got another screenshot, haven't we, of an article from the Tennessee Holler. So it says on it, the part of their headline, 97 deaths in terror attacks in the UK since 2005, over 408 deaths in mass shootings this year alone in the States. If you want to reduce deaths from terrorism and effectiveness of terrorists, strict gun control is a good way to do it. And that's a stark, that's a stark number, isn't it? So that's 97 deaths, and it says in terror attacks. So that doesn't just mean gun-related in the UK. That's including vehicles and all kinds of things since 2005. So that's in... Where are we now? So we're 14 years. There's been 97, whereas 408 deaths simply by shooting in the US this year alone, which is, I mean, if you adjust for population and the years, I mean, the vast difference.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. But it is a bit of a cliche that people want to jump onto this issue very quickly and make it about guns, make it about the very, the implement that causes the death. When actually, as we're going to see, there are all sorts of ideological and religious matters at play that are far more powerful even than guns, as we will see. So that's the social media take, that's the NRA take. And then we've got the Tory take, because it's election season. So,
yep, it's on us.
Never let a tragedy go to waste. If it's election season, please use it as a political football. That's what so many parties want to do. And so the Conservatives tweeted out about tougher sentencing for terrorists. And there is an argument to be made that this guy, he was given 16 years for his terror offence. He was let out after 8 years.
Sure.
There does seem to be an issue of things falling through the cracks here.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had a chance to look into all the details, but there was the sense of under a particular system, after 8 years, it was almost an automatic process rather than simply you're up for parole and now we'll think about it. And that allowed him back out onto the street. Now, I can't speak to the complete accuracy of that, but...
Yeah.
But people were, like you say, Boris Johnson, Conservatives were quick to jump on it, despite the fact the family were saying, please don't use this.
Right. Yeah, because Jack Merritt, is one of the two who died. There's Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones. And Jack Merritt, I think, was the student president or the president of this institute. What are they called? Let me get the Learning Together program. And he obviously very much believed in rehabilitation. He very much believed in inviting Usman Khan into this situation as a great redemptive tale about what can happen when somebody's de-radicalized. So Jack Merritt believed in and paid for with his own life a kind of a rehabilitation view of crime and punishment, restorative justice rather than just retributive justice. So I can understand why his family got very upset with the Tories making this about punitive justice when literally their son...
That's exactly the thing he's was sitting there working against.
Right, and paid for with his life.
Yeah.
So the Tory take was to make, political gain out of this. But, Labour too, their take... using Jeremy Corbyn as the mouthpiece, it's all about austerity. You were reading some stuff.
So I mean, Corbyn had said that convicted terrorists should not necessarily serve their full sentence, calling instead for a wider focus on issues such as rehabilitation and de-radicalisation. But then in a later speech, he condemned cuts to areas such as probation and mental health or youth services, saying this was likely to create missed chances to intervene in the lives of people who go on to commit inexcusable acts. And then he goes on and says real security doesn't only come from strong laws and intelligence, it also comes from effective public services that have the funding they need. And for me, reading that, I just think like he's way off the mark here. For the idea, I mean, there are certainly people who get involved in crime because of those things, but all the evidence suggests that this event had nothing to do with anything like that. I mean, this guy, the reason he went out and did these things was because of a radical Islamic ideology. It wasn't because his local services have been cut. Like no terrorist motivation is that. No terrorist is sitting there saying, they've closed the local Sure Start centre. That's it. We've got to take this into our own hands. I'm going to go do these kind of things. That is not the motivation at all, and it just seems just so ridiculous that Corbyn could even use this. In that,
it just shows that it's election season, doesn't it? Like the Tories instantly go to crime and punishment, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, and Labour goes to it's Tory austerity. The scapegoats that you want to blame stuff on. No one politically comes out of this looking very good.
I mean, I think one issue I think though politicians do face, and it's slightly different in this case because the family of Jack Merritt very specifically said, please don't use this. But I think the reality is that whenever anything happens, if a politician comments on it, people will say, stop using this for your own advantage. And if they don't comment on it, people will say, well, we've still not heard anything from these people. So it's that kind of you're damned if you do, damned if you don't type thing. As a public, we're not very... we're not very open to these things anyway. We want to have a pop at the politicians regardless.
So it's very incentivized for them to then come up with security theatre. I know what we're going to do. We're going to, double waiting lists at security at airports and things like that. And that's kind of the reality because they don't want to just be seen as offering condolences because then people come back and say, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. What are you going to do with your thoughts and prayers? That's not going to help.
Right.
Like, it's that kind of stuff, isn't it?
And that brings us on to the fifth take, the hero's take, because I think a lot of that is fueled by we don't want to feel as helpless as terror attacks make us feel. We don't want to feel like some maniac could just pull a knife on us, like for no reason. Like, we're getting on with our day and then he ends our lives. Yeah. We don't want to feel like the world is that scary. We want to feel like we're in control. And so, that's where the hero's take comes in, because we do love the hero narrative. We do love the idea of that guy Lucas with the narwhal, tusk.
Yeah, dude with a fire extinguisher and
right. Because you can almost hear the music, can't you? You can of the film, you can hear Hans Zimmer comes in, and he knows to rip a narwhal tusk off a wall,
it just that in itself is like something from a
right
film, isn't it? It's just
when would you ever think that was appropriate? I mean, he must have seen some pretty serious stuff to realize, I can take this off the wall because, no one's going to get upset with me for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he must have known, cometh the hour, cometh the man. But we love that idea of someone taking charge and someone taking down the terrorist. And certainly for the weekend, until more details of the victims came out, the big story was the heroes. And so you can understand, because the details of the victims hadn't come out, and we weren't really thinking about grieving, we weren't really thinking about the loss of life, I think the heroes came to the fore, and we liked that idea. We liked the idea of someone taking charge, ending the bad guys. 1-0 bad guy. The good guys win. But I do wonder whether that... Well, at that point, we forget Saskia Jones is bleeding to death at that point. Jack Merritt is bleeding out at that point. And when you have that perspective, it can feel hollow to be going, yay for narwhal tusks,
Yeah.
But I understand why we want to put ourselves in the shoes of the heroes, because we don't want to put ourselves in the shoes of the victims. We don't want to be the weak one. We want to tell the hero story. But sometimes, as we'll see, sometimes I think we need to embrace the tragic narrative, and we need to embrace, this is time to mourn, this is time to grieve, as well as celebrate those who did what they could to stop this disaster. But so that's the hero's take. And then there's the redemption take. Now, obviously, the meeting that actually brought all these people together, including brought Usman Khan to London Bridge, was a meeting of the Learning Together program, based out of Cambridge, and this is why Usman Khan was there. He was going to give a testimony to how he was de-radicalized.
Yeah.
How ironic. And then he ends up killing at that very program. But another story that came out was that there was a murderer who was out on day release. He was attending the same thing, I believe, called James Ford. And he had been in prison for murdering a woman with learning difficulties. And yet the headlines were, murderer out on day release, saves people and comes to the aid of those, And so... In one sense, James Merritt and Saskia Jones, their desire to see redemption happen, in hugely tragic circumstances, kind of came true.
And it's fascinating to see that kind of response by the media to it, when so often when you scroll through Twitter feeds or whatever, and you see someone who's done something wrong, despite the way we like to think of ourselves being civilized and progressive, there's often a lot of like, let's lock them up and throw away the key, and or they should be killed, or neutered, and all these kind of things. Like actually some quite barbaric views still come out. And so then to have somebody who had committed something, a terrible crime, to then being pointed out and people saying, no, here's someone who's turned themselves around and is in some sense the hero, a hero in this situation. That's an interesting thing to see in our society. The family of the murder victim was very understandably very unhappy. They didn't know that this guy was out on day release, and they quite rightly said, what if we were walking through London and we seen him
saw
across the road,
our killer when we thought he was meant to be in prison. So there are questions over that, but we do like the idea of redemption. And actually, James Merritt and Saskia Jones very much believed in that kind of redemption. And the Learning Together program was all about getting offenders and ex-offenders studying together with criminology students. And they're all learning together in the same environment, giving them a peer group, giving them a sense of community and belonging, and trying to see rehabilitation happen, not just retributive justice. Now, that is a really laudable aim. Who knows what will happen with the Learning Together program now? I think Usman Khan ruined a lot. And whether he's ruined that program too, we shall see.
Well, maybe we'll see. I mean, we're going to see in our next take, thinking about the Rehabilitation Take.
Yes.
And we've got some different angles there on perhaps why the way you approach rehabilitation with someone who's come from a radical, Islamic background may be slightly different to how you would approach it with someone who's grown up with Western values and has moved into crime for different reasons. So
Right. So you've got James Ford there at the Learning Together program, together with Usman Khan.
Yep.
James Ford has killed someone. Usman Khan hasn't at that stage, right?
No, so he was in prison for being part of a bomb plot, is that right?
Right,
Some
yeah.
kind of Al-Qaeda.
Part of some terror plots, yeah.
Yep.
And so we see a kind of a redemptive arc for James Ford. Usman Khan, the very opposite. What's the difference between James Ford and Usman Khan? I think we've got a great clip here from David Wood from Acts 17 Apologetics. So he has a great focus on Islam, and he talks us through in this clip the three aspects of trying to rehabilitate a terrorist, someone who has radical thinking. How do you de-radicalize them? And David Wood has got some interesting stuff to say on how you do that, how you change minds and hearts, and whether we're aiming at exactly the wrong things when we try to rehabilitate people in the West. Let's have a look at David Wood.
This program is built and designed for Western prisons.
Several years ago, I posted a video titled The Jihad Triangle, in which I explained that jihad isn't the result of one factor, mere belief in Islam, but the result of three factors. Jihad requires, 1, belief that Islam is true, 2, some understanding of what Islam teaches about jihad, and 3, the right personality type. Some people are willing to die for what they believe, others aren't. When you have someone who, 1, believes that Muhammad's words are true, 2, knows what Muhammad said about jihad, and 3, is willing to lay down his life for what he knows, you get jihad. Usman Khan obviously had the Jihad Triangle.
Illuminati.
But he was sent to prison. Now, if you send a jihadi to prison and you know he's going to be released one day, you'd better make sure you remove at least one of the sides of the Jihad Triangle. If you don't, you're releasing a jihadi, and it's only a matter of time before he goes on a killing spree. But which side should you try to remove? Should you try to change his personality type? Should you try to transform him from a man who's willing to die for what he believes into a man who isn't willing to die for what he believes? Sorry, but you're not going to change his personality type. Should you try to undermine his understanding of jihad? In other words, should you try to convince him that Islam is really a religion of peace? That's the goal of the de-radicalization programs that terrorists are put through. Unfortunately, no serious jihadi is going to learn about Islam from a booklet handed to him by the British government. He gets his religion from Allah and Muhammad, and he already knows what they say. He'll be happy to pretend that the de-radicalization program is really making a difference in his life, but that's just to help him get out on parole. The best chance you have of changing a jihadi's mind is targeting the remaining side of the Jihadi Triangle, his belief that Muhammad is a true prophet. Some of you are thinking, no, you can never change a jihadi's mind. Absolute nonsense. If you pile on enough facts about Muhammad and you refute enough lies about Muhammad, a lot of people will leave Islam. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And many of those who don't leave Islam will nevertheless have their confidence shaken to the point where they're not going to go out and slaughter a bunch of unbelievers. The reason we don't see many jihadis leaving Islam is that they never have their confidence shaken. Their family tells them Muhammad was great, Muhammad was wonderful. All their friends tell them Muhammad was great, Muhammad was wonderful. Their imams and sheikhs tell them Muhammad was great, Muhammad was wonderful. Politicians tell them Muhammad was great, Muhammad was wonderful. Not that they care what politicians say. Journalists tell them Muhammad was great, Muhammad was wonderful. Not that they care what journalists say. Actors tell them Muhammad was great, Muhammad was wonderful. Not that they care what actors say. Educators tell them Muhammad was great, Muhammad was wonderful. Not that they care what educators say. And no one is going to walk up to these guys and tell them the truth about Muhammad because people are scared of them.
Sides of the triangle, you've got so the radical believes Muhammad's words about jihad. They believe that Muhammad is a true prophet, and they're the sort of personality type that's going to die for what they believe in. You get all three, and you'll get a jihadi.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, quite, insightfully, I think trying to think about how do you pick that apart, and what side can you get at?
Yeah.
And actually trying to pick apart their belief that Muhammad was a good prophet or a prophet, someone to be listened to, seems to be the one to go down. But I think obviously at the end there, he's and so says this, and so tells them this, and so says this. It's verging into the realms of absurdity. But there is this kind of weird thing running through Western society at the moment, isn't there, where you cannot question the ideology of Islam. For to question the ideology is to be Islamophobic. And particularly when he said there, like, actors will tell them, I'm reminded very much of that interview with
Ben Affleck
and Sam Harris, where Ben Affleck loses his mind over the idea that Sam Harris is saying, well, this is what Islam teaches, this is what it's like in the Middle East, and Ben Affleck just is calling him racist, and he's furious.
It's gross. Yeah.
And he won't countenance the idea, and then you think, like, what does Ben Affleck know? Ben Affleck.
He's sure, Batman.
Yeah. But the idea that Ben Affleck has got any idea about Islam, is quite frankly laughable.
Yeah.
But yet, it's voices like his, who actually make it difficult for ideologies to be questioned. Right. Because if anyone questions it, like Sam Harris did, immediately they're trotted out as being racist and Islamophobic.
Right. And the result is you don't actually aim at the most important point for the jihadi, which is the allegiance to the words of Muhammad, right?
And he makes a good point about the de-radicalization side. He said, well, they're not going to listen to, some Western, Western person's view on, de-radicalization, because they have no respect for that. So it's laughable.
Yeah, so it's secular people trying to handle a deeply religious issue.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the difference with James Ford comes in, because he's a secular guy, being dealt with in a secular way, and he seems to have had some kind of measure of rehabilitation. Who knows? It was just one incident on a bridge on Friday, but there seems to be a big difference between James Ford coming through this Learning Together program and Usman Khan. The big difference being the deeply ingrained ideology that Islam has given to Usman Khan, and trying to take on the deeply held ideological views is like trying to take on a volcano with a water pistol. You're not going to really do it. And I think Jay Smith as well, a great YouTuber on these Muslim Christian issues, he talks about the difference between rehabilitation of a Western secular person and de-radicalization of a Muslim jihadi. Let's have a look at Jay Smith.
This program is built and designed for Western prisoners who do, in many cases, are social misfits, who in many cases do coming from working class backgrounds, who in many cases do have personality problems and often have learning deficiencies. This has been proven for many prisoners. That is the case. And so you can see why many of them do feel disenfranchised. Many of them do feel like they are social misfits. Many of them do go to drugs and drink and often do get caught up in crime. And so it stands to reason that if you have that kind of prisoner and you want to rehabilitate that kind of prisoner, then of course you would use this kind of program, Learning Together, and in this case, disengagement and desistance program. That would make sense for a Western prisoner in a Western context, having showing many of these Western proclivities. We're not dealing with Western prisoner now. These are not Western. And I hope Muslims are getting this. A Muslim, radical Muslim, does not start from the same premise. Usman Khan was not disenfranchised. He was not a loner. Look at these pictures. He belongs to a group. He was caught with 9 others. He was very much part of Al Mujahideen. He was being coached by Anjum Chowdhury, and he was coached on this book here. He was coached on this very book, the Quran. He knew about this book. He actually read this book. He was taught about this book, and I know exactly the verses he was given, because if you can read it, you can see these verses are full. I mean, this book is full of violent verse after violent verse after violent verse, about 150 violent verses in this book. We've done this before. This is not new. You've not heard me just make this up. I've said this many times before. So we're dealing with someone who believes that this book is uncreated, that it has always existed, that is co-eternal with God himself, Allah himself, and therefore it is unfettered with any human intervention, that it is exactly the same book that has always existed for 1400 years. The same book that I have in my hand here, this Arabic Quran, is the same that exists in heaven. And therefore, if you are brought up in that, and he was brought up in that, remember, he was brought up in a very strong Muslim family, and you believe that this is God's holy word and not a man-made document, therefore it must be obeyed and never critiqued. And that's what a Muslim is, someone who obeys, someone who is submissive. Then can you understand when you're dealing with a completely different mindset, a completely different worldview?
Very different to the secular mind view that we have, and therefore it's a religious issue that needs a religious solution, a spiritual solution, something that goes deep.
Yeah, absolutely, and it seems like common sense. I mean, even when we talked earlier about you've got this setting, the learning together, and you've got your Usman Khan with your James Ford.
Mm-hmm.
You could probably look at those and say, well, these guys are coming from very different places. There's not a kind of one size fits all answer to how do you rehabilitate these people. And it seems, in our society, we're maybe overly, but in some sense, in a good sense, on the whole, we're getting better at kind of saying we understand people have different cultures and come from different places and backgrounds, and we want to be respectful of people's cultures and meet them where they're at. So if we go to other nations, we'll be aware of the culture and not do things that will offend them or be unhelpful and yada, yada, yada. But that seems to have not quite trickled through into this rehabilitation system, which seems to have got this one-size-fits-all system, which, like Jay Smith is saying there, might be great for the disenfranchised, misfit Westerner, but actually for the person who's coming from radical ideology, you need a very different beast to start dismantling that.
Right.
And I think there's some great wisdom in there.
Right. And we want to know how to de-radicalize radicals, but we don't want to go to the heart of the issue. And the heart of the issue is an ancient book and an ancient precedent in Muhammad that was deeply violent, and it just seems like it's taking on a lava flow with a water pistol gun, just to try to big up the Muhammad and Islam, and it's lovely and it's nice, because if you say that, then people are going to go to the most trusted sources of Islam. They're going to read this stuff, including the glory of martyrdom, and that's the sort of the 8th take on our 9 that we've got, is the terrorism take. Why was he wearing a fake bomb jacket, a suicide vest? Why was he wearing that fake suicide vest? So that he would be shot by the police, so that he would die in martyrdom. And where did he get that idea from? He got it from Islam's most trusted sources, straight from the Quran, straight from the Hadith. That to die in martyrdom is your ticket to paradise. And to be ignorant of that is really not to be engaging with the issue at all, really. So, we're getting more and more serious in terms of the takes on this issue, but I think it would be really remiss of us to miss the final take, which is the personal take. That this is an absolute tragedy, and whatever other politics is going on, whatever other ideology is going on, there are personal tragedies. The death of anyone is a huge tragedy that is to be mourned. Death is an enemy, and it is cut short to people with very bright futures ahead of them. Saskia Jones and Jack Merritt. Apologies, I said James Merritt earlier. I was confusing the name with James Ford. But Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones, two very bright people who believed in what they were doing, believed in rehabilitation, believed in something beyond crime and punishment, something quite gospel-shaped, really. That mercy triumphs over judgment. You know, we have it on good authority that that's the case, and they seem to be pursuing that, and how tragic it is that they're now no longer with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on BBC Breakfast, there was a wonderful tribute paid to Saskia Jones, and I thought it just, in less than a minute, really beautifully humanized her. When we want to talk about all the glitz and the glamour and the narwhal tusks and all the rest that's going on, let's remember Saskia, let's remember Jack, let's see the tribute that was paid to Saskia Jones.
She stood out. She stood out above everyone, partly because she wanted to. She wasn't afraid to say anything. There was no fooling her. She was really funny. She had a wicked sense of humour. She was cheeky. She was mischievous. She said things that she knew would be a bit risky, but they were always right. She was a lovely, lovely woman. She made me laugh. She called me on things. Lots of people are quite scared of me. She wasn't. She was fearless. She was a warrior. She was going to change the world. Maybe she will.
She was going to change the world. Maybe she will. Really poignant mix of past tense and future tense there. It's very poignant that she's talking in the past tense about someone who was very alive, very active in this world on Friday afternoon. And we're now speaking in the past tense about her. That is a total tragedy. But then maybe she will. Maybe she will change the world.
Yeah, and there may be a sense in which this despite, we're saying both of these, Jack and Saskia had this passion for rehabilitation, and we may have seen in some sense both the strength and limitations of that through this event.
Right.
And it may well be a catalyst for a change in that system.
Right.
So it may well be that people come away and say rehabilitation is still a good thing, because we can look at the James Fords, if indeed there is genuine rehabilitation there. But there needs to be more approaches for those coming from different areas, And for me, I mean, the thing, it just, as in lots of things, what we're seeing is a polarization, so you'll have those who were saying they were about rehabilitation and therefore we should go down that road. And there'll be those, much like the Conservatives have leapt in and said it's all about tougher sentences, and people will tend to polarize over the two. And I wonder, for me as a Christian, or maybe for us as Christians, but I wonder whether we need to sit somewhere between the two, that we should be about rehabilitation, because we are the ultimate second chance people, aren't we? That's who we are. And that should be a kind of Christian value. But yet I think as well, the tougher sentencing, it does appear that there are lots of things that people do in this nation and are then let off very lightly. And, I think of kind of an eye for an eye stuff. I mean, and I don't think, and some people will say, oh, Jesus overturns that. No, I don't think Jesus overturns an eye for an eye in a criminal sense. I think, the examples he talks about are not people breaking the law. It's interpersonal relations. And in that case, we shouldn't do eye for an eye. But eye for an eye, biblically, is there so that the punishment fits the crime, and also that the punishment itself is not abusive, so that you can't punish someone overly for what they've done. And I think as Christians, we need to sit somewhere between the two, that we need to say that we do need tough sentences because punishment should fit the crime. But equally, we need rehabilitation because statistics on people reoffending after coming out of prison are shocking as well. So whether we can sit on everyone thinks we've got the middle ground. Everyone thinks they're the reasonable middle anyway, don't they? But
I'm not. I'm above it all. I'm actually above everybody.
But as people will pull one way or the other to be able to say, look, there is value in both sides here, and so maybe even from this tragedy, there can be good that comes of it. I
think both sides are pointing to there's law and there's gospel. There's law justice must be done, there's gospel, there's mercy for sinners.
Yeah.
Praise God for that. And then there's death, which actually makes every other issue we face ring hollow, you know, and every other fight we have. Labour versus Tory, like, who cares? 2 people are dead, you know? Like, like even gun control versus whatever, you know, like, who cares? Like whatever, you know, rehabilitation versus retributive justice, you know, who cares? 2 people are dead. Because, like, death is the final enemy, says 1 Corinthians 15. And if we don't have an answer to that, then every other debate we have is rearranging, you know,
deck chairs on
the Titanic. But praise God, you know, thanks be to God, we have the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ, you know, who plunged down into death. He was the one offering rehabilitation. He was the one offering mercy to enemies like Usman Khan. And he ended up paying with his own blood for it. You know, he was a Jack Merritt, like times infinity. He was one offering a safe space, you know, for offenders like you and me, and paid for it with his own blood, and yet rises up again to offer us that mercy, that, you know, beyond judgment, beyond justice, there is mercy. There's the goodness of Jesus. There's the forgiveness of the gospel, and there's an answer to death, because, you know, in a sense, Saskia Jones and Jack Merritt, they were cut short. Their lives were cut short, but all of our lives are running out. And if we don't have an answer to that, then we're just shuffling around on the edges of these issues, when actually the big enemy is death. But praise God, we have a solution. Praise God, we have Jesus. You know. So there are 9 takes and a 10th. You know, there's the gospel. You know, there's Jesus offering reconciliation at the cost of his own life for us, and then offering us, you know, life from the dead. We do have good news for this world. So let's keep speaking it this week. So, Paul, how can people stay tuned to Speak Life?
Yep, well, same avenues as always. If you're on social media, then follow us or like us, subscribe on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're on YouTube, obviously. That's where we are right now. So give us a subscribe on there. That will keep you informed of stuff. You can also get signed up for our newsletter. We'll make sure we pop that down in the comments of exactly where to go. Can you remember off the top of your head where the sign up is for that?
If you go to speaklife.org.uk, it'll
you'll be able to find it there. So you can get on our newsletter, and you'll be able to keep up with our weekly news. And also that will give you a bit of a roundup of resources that are going out as well. So videos, the podcast, you can find them all collected in one spot. So it's a great thing to be signed up for. And do get active on Facebook at the moment. We're sharing our Christmas videos on Facebook quite a lot, and it's a really great platform for you to be able to share these 3-minute videos of gospel content this Christmas. A great way of sharing your faith online. That should do us for this week. Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks, Glenn. It's been good.
Cool. See you next time. God bless.
Take care. Bye.